If you're a Linux beginner and you've been hearing about all the praise and hype revolving around Arch Linux, and let's say you went to the installer and you saw that it's difficult to install, well, this video is just for you because it shows you the easier way to install Arch Linux using an installer. Now, this isn't like Manjaro or EndeavourOS or Arca Linux or all the other kinds of Arch-based distributions. This one doesn't have its marketing and branding on it once you've installed it. It's basically just pure Arch with an installer. So what we're going to take a look at in this video is going to be the Anarchy installer. And this is the website for it. This is hosted on GitLab. So I will post a link in the description on where to get it. So all of the versions for installing are right here on GitLab. And you can go ahead and install the version you'd like. So for this video, the most current version is 1.2.1. And so here you have your options from what to install. I personally would install just the ISO. I don't usually deal with torrents, so you can go ahead. It's going to take you to SourceForge, and then once those 5 seconds load up, you can go ahead and grab the ISO. Now keep in mind, this is a pretty light ISO. I believe it's around 600 megabytes. So it's going to be pretty quick to install in comparison to other installations. Now, again, one thing I want to just really briefly mention is, again, this is, if you really want the easiest way to just install something that's based off of Arch, you can go ahead and install a distro like one of the ones that I mentioned. But I think that this is the first step that you should take in trying to install Arch Linux the Arch way, because it goes with this installer or any other type of installer like this one. Then you can, if you're feeling brave enough, move on to an installation script. And then finally, when you're confident enough, you can go ahead and install Arch Linux using the installation guide that it provides on its own wiki, which it has an amazing wiki, by the way. Okay, so where am I at right now? On this web page, I am showcasing Rosa Image Writer, and this is going to be the tool that I recommend using. And you can, of course, use the terminal and the dd commands to just write the ISO onto your flash drive or whatever. It's going to be faster, but if you are a beginner, this is definitely the easier and more convenient way. So once you're on this page, again, it's going to be in the description. You can go ahead and click for Linux, and once you click that, you can save it wherever you would like that. And once you have that, you're going to get the zipped file. You're going to want to extract that and go into the folder. And what you could do is you can open up a terminal and then copy the path where the installed Rosa Image Writer is and type cd, and then paste the path into the into your terminal. And then you could do sudo. And one thing that's really easy to do is you could just drag this and drop it into the terminal and press enter, type up your password, and it's going to appear. Now all you have to do is plug in your USB device or whatever, select the Anarchy ISO, and just click write, and you're going to be good to go. Now I'm going to be doing this on a virtual machine, so keep that in mind. Now, I do also recommend this if you're, again, not confident enough. I do recommend trying it on a virtual machine. So one thing is that for some reason, when I have this setting right here, VBox VGA for my graphics controller, it freezes up. So if you have the same problem, I recommend switching to VMS VGA. Press OK. And so let's start up and go to the actual installation. So I do realize that was kind of a long intro, so I'm going to write down in the comments to skip to this part. Okay, so for the installer itself, you're going to be presented with this screen. So you just press enter, or you could wait it to load, and it's going to go ahead and take you to the installation. So let this load up really quickly. Alright, once that loads up, you're presented with this screen right here, and you have a couple of options. Now, there's some things to take note before we go into the installer, and that is if you take a look here, there is 5 options. They're numbered, and that's how you can access each option. So if you want to update the installer, you could go ahead and press 2. This is useful if, let's say, your ISO has been installed onto your USB drive. Let's say you flashed it like a month ago. It's always good to be up to date. And another thing is the connection test, especially if you're on Wi-Fi, but you don't have to do this right away. It's going to prompt you to connect to your Wi-Fi either way. So what we can do is just press 1 and go ahead and access the installer. Now keep in mind, I tried this installer a year ago and I had problems with the Wi-Fi for some reason. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So that's why I would recommend definitely testing that out if you're on a laptop. So the first thing is it just asks for the language. So we could just press enter again for the default key map. And then what I recommend is you download and rank the new mirrors. So you press enter and you go with the default one. If not, you could choose your country, go with that. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to search for the fastest mirrors in comparison to where you're from, so that the installation of the updates and whatnot can be as fast as possible. So just let that load up. And normally if you're on a laptop, if you're using Wi-Fi and whatnot, this is where it's going to prompt you to ask you to connect to connection. But if you're using the Ethernet, it just does that directly. So for the locale, we could go ahead and choose. Now I'm just going to go with the defaults for this. Of course, this is more personalized. And as you can see, it's very easy. Just asks you for language, locale, time zone. I'm just, again, going to go with the default sub-time zone. You could choose whatever applies to you. Now this part, this I would say is, as you can see, it was a very easy, just the press of a button, just pressing enter, step-by-step process, very easy. Now this, I would say, is the most difficult part of installing Arch Linux using the Anarchy installer. Now I'm going to really quickly go here to the default Arch wiki. We're going to look at the installation guide, and I'm also going to post this in the description. I do recommend starting step by step, referencing the wiki so that you can start learning bits by bits how to do this type of stuff. So this is kind of giving you an idea and explaining here what to do when it comes to partitioning the disks. So we have some information here. Now for this video in particular, I'm going to try to make it easier, so I'm not going to go too into detail when it comes to partitioning. Again, this is the most difficult part, and if you don't feel confident enough, I recommend just going with the auto partition drive option. And if you do want to mess around with that, then I recommend you access the wiki and you use a virtual machine and go to manual partition drive option. And if we click that, it shows you all your drives here, and you can see all the information and you can edit them, write the changes. But I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. And this is also taking into consideration that you just want to install Arch Linux solely on your system, meaning you're not trying to dual boot or anything like that. And if you're not, then the auto partition drive option, we're going to press enter on that, is more than enough to take care of the job. So we go with that. It gives you your options. I have given this virtual machine 16 gigabytes of memory, so we can see that in the size. We're going to click OK to go ahead and confirm. Now, when it asks you for your file system type, we're going to go with the ext4. This is the default format for Linux systems, and it's going to ask us also if we want to swap space. Now, we're going to go ahead and click yes for this. And basically what this is it's related to the RAM. And so when you have tasks filled up and whatnot, when you put your computer to sleep and you want to turn it back on, it makes use of the swap space so that the memory doesn't get filled up to the max extent. So I have given this very little I've given it very little memory. Excuse me. I've given it very little memory, and that's why it's recommending only 500 megabytes for my swap space. Now, I think that you should base off your swap size based off of your RAM. So if you have, for example, a computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM, and if you're not certain, you could really easily check using screen fetch on your, or neo fetch on your terminal. So I have actually 16 gigabytes on this laptop. I have 16 gigabytes of RAM. So if you have, for example, 8, then I recommend you give your swap size 8 gigabytes of RAM, or honestly, even 4 would be suffice. So in my case, what I would do is, because I have 16 gigabytes of RAM, I would type 16 and then G. That's it. But again, I have not given this nearly enough memory, so I'm going to go back to writing 512 M for megabytes and just click OK. So I'm going to go with the defaults, and that's that. But again, if you have 8 gigs of RAM and you have the space for that, then go ahead and give it 8 gigabytes for the swap size. Okay, so for this, it's going to ask if we would like to use the GPT partitioning. We're going to go ahead and go with no for this option. And now it shows all the changes. So we have altogether 16 gigabytes of memory. The file system type is going to be ext4. Swap space is 500 megabytes. So everything looks good and correct. We're going to go ahead and click Write Changes. And again, that was basically the most difficult part of this entire installation. The beginning was easy, and this part isn't difficult either, because now it's going to ask us what type of desktop we want. Now, before you click on anything, what I recommend is going to Anarchy-Advanced. And the reason why is, I'm assuming you guys are going to use a desktop. So instead of going with one of these two options, if you choose one of them, it doesn't really let you go back. At least when I've done that, it didn't give any option for going back. So if you click on the advanced option, it's going to give you more options. So we're going to go ahead and go with that. And when it comes to the kernel, well, there are definitely a lot of options here, and I really like that because you have a bunch of different kernels. If you're running newer hardware, I would just go with the default kernel instead of the LTS one. But if you want the developer tools, you can go ahead and go with the second option. But most of you would probably want just the regular Arch Linux kernel. And of course, if you want more security, you can go with the hardened version. Again, most of you are just going to want the first option. Same thing with this when it comes to the shell for the terminal. Most distros, as far as I know, come with Bash, but there's plenty of options here. I know about Fish and ZSH. These other ones I haven't really heard of before, but again, for most of you guys, the default is going to be what you're looking for. Now, when it comes to the bootloader, usually when you install a Linux distro, it installs grub, and it uses that as your bootloader, so we're going to go with grub. And now for this part, if you want a network manager with a interface that you can work with, makes it a lot easier, just go with the default network manager. I've tried NetCTL, and it's definitely, when it comes to Wi-Fi, a lot more confusing, and you have to be more tech savvy to get it working. So we're just going to go with the network manager. Now it's going to ask if you want support for 32-bit software. I'm going to go ahead, click yes, enable DHCP at boot as well, yes. Now if you're on a laptop, you're going to want to go with yes as well on this. I am on a laptop, but because I'm using a virtual machine, this isn't required. If you have a DSL modem or connector or whatever, you're going to want to go with this, but this doesn't apply to me. Now if you're also dual booting, this is going to apply to you, but again, we're just going to install Arch Linux, and that's it. So we're going to go with no. Now here's the thing, you're going to want to install a desktop, so we're going to go with yes. And here is where you have all your options that you would need. So when it comes to the desktops, as you can see, there's customized desktops offered here. So they are Budgie, Cinnamon, GNOME, OpenBox, XFCE. Then there's also window managers if you're into that. There's plenty of options here. But for most of us, we're probably going to just want a clean desktop environment, and it has all the main desktops we need here. So for this video in particular, if you've watched my channel before, you're going to know I love KDE Plasma. But also, I do want to show something. If you do choose to go with KDE Plasma, there's an extra step that you're going to want to do regarding your login interface. So if you want to select an option, you just press the spacebar and then press enter for done. It's going to ask you if you want the minimal desktop. If you don't, just go with no. It's going to install everything else you need. If you do, go with yes. I would personally not install the minimal one because if you install the minimum desktop, there are certain configurations such as the login screen and the user manager that are missing by default. So I would recommend you don't go bare minimal. And this is for VirtualBox, so that's no problem. If you're on a laptop, go with yes. And for the display manager, you're definitely going to want a login manager. Now I'm going to give a brief explanation of what these options are. When it comes to GDM, it's pretty clear. It's for the GNOME desktop environment. So if you chose that as your desktop, you can go with that. But otherwise, also if you went with KDE, the SDDM login manager is going to be the option for you. But for everything else, basically XFCE, Budgie, Cinnamon, just basically other desktop environments, they all use LightDM by default for their login manager. And LXDM, I believe this is for the LXD desktop environment. So again, we're using KDE Plasma. This is the option we're going with. I'm just going to call this Arch instead. So this is going to be the root account that we're going to make. But I do recommend adding a new user. So this is going to be the username and the name, and then the password. Just going to enter that really quickly. And yes, we're going to give it administrative privilege. Okay, all we have to do is click done. And we're going to click yes for this, although this isn't necessary. And this is very, very nice and convenient, is that it gives you a bunch of options here. And it gives you all these. It's nice that they're categorized. If we press enter and select one of these, we have the web browsers here, email clients. Basically, instead of wasting time installing stuff post installation, you can install these during your installation. And again, if you want to select an option, you just press space and then enter for OK. So that's going to load up. So you can take a look at all of this and you can go ahead and choose what you find necessary, or you don't have to choose anything at all. And all you have to do is just press enter for install. It asks you if you want all the other software or not. We're going to go with yes for this because we're not going to use any other software. And then it's going to update this and you click install. It's going to take about, well, here it says it estimates 5 minutes. Usually it's about 5 to 10. So let this load up for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to let it load up, and we'll see what happens afterwards. Alright, we're back with the installation finished. It took about 10 minutes, I would say. So now you could just reboot the system. I would recommend just powering it off. So you could just choose that, remove your USB. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the reset option, and we can boot into the existing OS, and if it worked, you're going to be presented with the Grub bootloader, so we can go ahead and log in. Now, let me just remove this really quickly. So this is what I wanted to mention. This is why I installed KDE Plasma as the desktop. The installation is basically done. You're good to go. But when it comes to the SDDM login manager, it doesn't really look good by default. So let's go ahead and log in really quickly. And we're going to try to fix that. So again, like I said, if you installed a different login manager, or a different desktop, at this point, this part is, it's not really applicable for you. But again, we're going to try to get that fixed. So what I recommend doing is go to the system settings, and also if you're on Wi-Fi, you're going to have the option for the graphical option for the network. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to startup and shutdown, and we're going to click on the Breeze option and click apply. Enter our password, and this should fix it. Now, if this alone doesn't fix it, I do have a command that you can use, and basically it's sudo systemctl enable sddm.service-f. I'm going to enter the password, and now when we log out of the system, again, you might not have to type that command up. That's only if it doesn't work even after just changing it to the option, to the Breeze option, but now it should work and be the standard login theme that we're used to by KDE. And so the last thing that I'm going to check is the default applications and the system resources. So what we're going to do really quickly is do sudo pacman-S or let's just do screen fetch. Let's hope this installs because my Wi-Fi is pretty slow. So let's do screen fetch, and we'll be taking a look at the amount of packages. So the packages installed by default are 753. If we chose the minimal KDE option, this would be hovering around 600. And everything else is like so. And if we go to, let's open up the system monitor. So by default, in terms of RAM usage, it's under 400 megabytes. So keep in mind, this is KDE Plasma we're talking about here, and it's only using 360 megabytes of RAM, and this is on a virtual machine, so it may be different on real hardware, but that's really good. And the final thing we're going to check, I'm just going to switch the menu here so that it's easier to see each application and faster as well. Just going to go with the application menu. Okay, so for development, we have the Qt development tools. For graphics, we have the basic KDE applications here, the Falcon web browser, the BitTorrent client, video editor, music player. So this definitely installs a couple of things. You might not want some of these stuff. That's why you might want to go with the minimal version. But you would be missing a couple stuff. So if you do go with the minimal version, I do recommend after that doing sudo pacman-s plasma-meta to install some of the essentials. But this is basically irrelevant to me because I already have them installed. So that was basically it. Hopefully this worked out for you. Hopefully this made you a bit more confident in going closer and closer to installing Arch Linux the Arch way. Hopefully this maybe inspires you to install it with an installation script and then moving on to just following the instructions. But it's really not that bad. It's not that confusing. And even if you fail on the first try, just keep on doing it. And of course, if you have a virtual machine, then you don't have to worry about messing anything up. So that was basically it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to like and subscribe, and if you do have any questions or comments, make sure to comment down below. And that was basically it for this video. Thanks for watching.